The basement archive of the Ashfield Garrison Museum always felt like another world. 3 floors below the polished displays and informative plaques, the air hung thick with dust and forgotten stories. I'd spent the better part of a decade as curator here, but budget cuts meant fewer and fewer visitors. My Voices of the Forgotten exhibit was my last chance, a desperate effort to breathe life into our small museum. I shifted another unmarked crate, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The museum board had given me 6 weeks to create something remarkable, or we'd face closure. No pressure. "Come on," I muttered, brushing cobwebs from my sleeve. "Give me something I can use." The crate I'd been wrestling with finally gave way, its nails groaning as I pried off the lid. Inside lay a standard-issue kit bag, several yellowed envelopes, and a small leather-bound book. I lifted the book carefully. Its cover was worn smooth around the edges, the leather cracked with age. The name inside was written in a tight, careful handwriting. Property of Private Arthur Finch, 2nd Battalion, Dorsetshire Regiment. I recognized the name immediately. Arthur Finch, one of Ashfield's sons who never returned from Burma after being captured by Japanese forces in 1943, listed as missing, presumed dead. No grave, no ceremony, just a name on our town's memorial. His diary, not a military log, but personal thoughts. The historian in me knew this was perfect for the exhibit, a genuine first-person account. But something else stirred as I thumbed through those pages, a quieter, more personal curiosity. I should have logged it properly, left it in the archive overnight. Instead, I slipped it into my bag. That evening, I sat in my quiet apartment, the diary open on my lap. The radiator clicked and hummed, fighting against the autumn chill as rain tapped against the windows. Arthur's early entries were ordinary: training, seasickness during transport, complaints about food. Then came his deployment to Burma, the chaos of retreat and capture. May 15th, 1943, March today. Don't know how far. Jungle so thick you can barely breathe. Roberts collapsed from heat. They didn't stop. I read until my eyes burned, until the radiator fell silent and my tea went cold. It was nearly midnight when I finally closed the diary and crawled into bed. The dream came immediately. Not the familiar broken images of normal sleep, but something intense and overwhelming. Humidity pressed against my skin like a hot, wet cloth. The drone of insects filled my ears. Each breath tasted of earth and rot. Ahead, through a tangle of green, figures moved in single file, skeletal men stumbling forward under the watchful eyes of soldiers with fixed bayonets. I jerked awake at 3 a.m, sheets damp with sweat, my heart racing. For several seconds I could still taste the jungle air, still feel the oppressive heat. As my bedroom slowly came back into focus, I glanced at my nightstand where Arthur's diary lay. In the dim light it seemed to wait patiently, like a doorway left slightly open. I couldn't fall back asleep. Despite my bedroom feeling comfortable, a phantom sweat made my skin feel sticky. Something about Arthur's diary had gotten under my skin, leaving an uneasy feeling that I couldn't quite shake off. Morning brought no relief. I arrived at the museum early, hoping work would distract me, but found myself staring blankly at acquisition forms. My thoughts kept drifting back to that leather-bound book tucked in my bag. Eventually, I locked my office door and pulled it out, telling myself I was just being thorough for the exhibit. Arthur's handwriting changed as the entries went on, growing tighter, more compact, as if paper was becoming scarce. He described the camp with brutal simplicity: bamboo huts raised on stilts, latrines that overflowed during monsoon rains, the constant humidity that rotted cloth and flesh alike. "The guards counted us again today," he wrote. "Third time since dawn. Reynolds collapsed during roll call. The sun here shows no mercy even in November. 62 men now, we started with 89. I was so absorbed that I barely noticed when the air in my climate-controlled office seemed to thicken. Only when I struggled to draw a full breath did I look up, confused. The ventilation system hummed steadily, yet the air felt heavy, like breathing through wet cotton. A strange smell caught my attention, earthy and rich like soil after rain, with hints of something vegetal and rotting. I glanced at my trash bin. Empty. The smell had no source, yet it filled my senses completely before vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "Just tired," I muttered, closing the diary. "Need more sleep." That evening, I tried distracting myself with everyday tasks: laundry, emails, a documentary I'd been meaning to watch. But by 7 p.m., the diary's presence on my coffee table had become an irresistible pull. Those entries grew sparser, marking the grinding routine of captivity. Disease moved through the camp with grim efficiency. Names appeared and disappeared from his account with heartbreaking regularity. As I read about a man who died from an infected foot wound, I became aware of sounds just at the edge of hearing, a soft, persistent coughing coming from somewhere inside my apartment. I set the diary down and listened. Nothing. The building was quiet. Yet when I resumed reading, the sound returned, distant and muffled, as if coming through a wall that wasn't there. I pushed on, my rational mind insisting it was just the building settling or a neighbor's television. Arthur described the jungle surrounding the camp, how its relentless growth seemed to be swallowing the perimeter fences. Some nights, he wrote, the darkness beneath the canopy seemed to watch them with patient, hungry eyes. I must have dozed off because suddenly I was no longer in my apartment. I stood ankle-deep in mud that squelched around my shoes. The air was thick with moisture, making each breath feel like drowning slowly. Before me stretched a clearing surrounded by dense jungle populated with bamboo structures, crude barracks with thatched roofs. In the gray pre-dawn light, skeletal figures moved with the deliberate slowness of the chronically exhausted. This wasn't a dream. The sensations were too immediate, too real. I could smell the rot of the jungle, feel insects landing on my exposed skin, taste the metallic quality of the air before rain. Yet none of the prisoners seemed aware of my presence. Among them, I spotted a man whose face I recognized from the photograph included with his effects. Arthur Finch, gaunt, his cheekbones sharp beneath his skin, but unmistakable. He moved with purpose toward one of the barracks, glancing nervously over his shoulder at a guard tower. I tried to call out, to move toward him, but found myself rooted to the spot, a helpless observer to events 75 years past. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the vision collapsed. I was back in my apartment, the diary open on my lap, my heart pounding. The clock read 3:17 in the morning, the same time I'd awakened from my dream the night before. On the page before me, Arthur's next entry was dated April 17, 1943, the day he'd begun planning his escape. I closed the diary with trembling hands, but even as I set it aside, I could still feel mud between my toes that weren't there, still smell the jungle on my skin. Something had opened between Arthur's world and mine, and I was afraid it wouldn't be so easily closed. I tried to lose myself in work the next day. The museum's new exhibit needed my attention, funding paperwork, selecting artifacts, designing displays. But Arthur's diary kept pulling at my thoughts like a splinter beneath my skin. Every time I focused on a task, my mind would drift to the jungle heat and gaunt faces. By late afternoon, I'd accomplished almost nothing. The memories of that strange visit haunted me. The sounds of cicadas, the dense humidity, the thin faces of men who'd been dead for decades. It wasn't a dream. I tried convincing myself it was, but dreams fade. These sensations only grew sharper with each passing hour. When I returned home, I told myself I wouldn't open the diary again. I placed it deliberately on my bookshelf and prepared dinner, trying to focus on mundane tasks, but my eyes kept drifting to its worn leather spine. By 8 o'clock in the evening, I'd given in, my hands trembling slightly as I retrieved it. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. Stress, overwork, and overactive imagination, but none of them stuck. The April 17th entry detailed Arthur's growing desperation. 62 men remained alive, but their numbers dwindled weekly from disease and poor nutrition. Arthur wrote of secret conversations with 3 other prisoners about escaping during the monsoon season when the guards would be distracted by the weather. The words pulled me under like a riptide. When I looked up, my apartment had vanished. The camp materialized around me, more substantial than before. I stood beside a row of bamboo huts as rain poured through the tree canopy above. The ground had become a muddy mess, and prisoners struggled through mud that reached their ankles. The air felt thicker, the sound sharper, less like I was watching a scene and more like I was standing in one. I recognized Arthur immediately. He'd grown even thinner, his cheekbones sharp as blades beneath his skin. He huddled with 3 other men beneath a leaking shelter, their voices too low for me to hear. One man, a corporal based on the tattered remnants of his uniform, pointed toward a section of fence partially hidden by jungle growth. The camp had expanded in my view. Beyond the main yard, I could now see what the prisoners called the box, a bamboo cage too small to stand in where men were left for days in the blistering sun or pouring rain. A prisoner was curled inside it now, so still I couldn't tell if he was alive. Beyond that stood a simple wooden post where public punishments were carried out. Dark stains marked the muddy ground beneath it. A Japanese guard passed so close I could smell the tobacco on his uniform and the metallic scent of rain on his rifle. I instinctively stepped back, expecting discovery, but he walked through me as if I were smoke. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I watched Arthur for what felt like hours. The camp's nighttime routine unfolded. The meager evening meal, the roll call, the uneasy settling into sleep. I wanted to leave, but found myself unable to break away, as if invisible threads bound me to this place. As prisoners filed into their quarters, one man, skeletal, with hollowed cheeks and fever-bright eyes, lingered. He stood several feet from Arthur, watching the rain. Something about his stillness drew my attention. He wasn't hurrying for shelter like the others, just standing motionless in the downpour. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward me. Our eyes met across impossible decades. His gaze locked onto mine, not through me, not around me, but directly at me. Recognition flickered in his sunken eyes, followed by something worse, a weary, hollow accusation that cut through my soul. I stumbled backward, a strangled sound escaping my throat. He continued to stare, his eyes asking why I watched their suffering without helping, why I made their private hell my spectacle. In that moment, I felt like a vulture circling dying men. With violent suddenness, I was back in my apartment, sprawled on the floor. The diary lay open beside me, its pages fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. My watch read 3:17 in the morning, the exact time I'd awakened the night before. I scrambled away from the diary, heart hammering in my chest. The rules had changed. I was no longer an invisible observer. I had become part of their world, and they, or at least one of them, had become aware of mine. Sleep was impossible. I spent the remaining hours until dawn researching the camp, searching for any mention of the man who had seen me. I found nothing but sparse official records, cold statistics of captured and dead. By morning, exhaustion clouded my thoughts, but one certainty remained. I would return to the diary tonight, not because I wanted to, but because I knew, with inexplicable certainty, that the skeletal man was waiting for me. The diary sat on my coffee table, its presence like a gravity well pulling at my consciousness. And Arthur's story wasn't finished. Neither, I feared, was mine. I dragged myself through my workday, feeling like a ghost among my colleagues. They noticed my appearance, the dark circles under my eyes, my haunted stare. But I brushed off their concerns with mumbled excuses about not sleeping well. I knew the truth would only earn me worried looks and suggestions to see a psychiatrist. The museum closed at 5 in the evening. I stayed late, organizing the new exhibit like a robot, my mind somewhere else entirely. By 7 p.m., I was alone in the building, sitting at my desk with Arthur's diary before me. The leather-bound journal seemed to pulse with a menacing energy, pulling me back to that rain-soaked nightmare in Burma. I knew I should destroy it, burn it, lock it away, anything but read it. But a terrible logic drove my compulsion. I had to know how the story ended. If I could just finish the diary, perhaps the connection would break. The curse, because I now admitted to myself that's what this was, might finally release me. With shaking hands, I turned to where I had last stopped. Arthur's final entries grew increasingly desperate, his handwriting becoming more and more shaky along with his hope. April 20th, 1943. The plan is set. 4 of us tomorrow night. The moon will be new. Jenkins says he's bribed a guard with his dead wife's wedding ring. God forgive me, I don't think we'll make it. But staying means certain death. Dysentery's taken 3 more. Watkins died this morning. 58 of us left. April 21st. Tonight, midnight. If anyone finds this, tell my Margaret I tried to come home. This last entry was scrawled hastily, the ink blotched in places. My heart raced as I read. knowing I was approaching the end, both Arthur's and whatever threshold I'd been crossing since opening this cursed object. The final entry was barely legible, written in what looked like a different hand entirely. They knew. Jenkins betrayed us. Being taken to Commandant N. The entry ended abruptly mid-word. I stared at the incomplete sentence, the phantom of that missing word hanging in the air between worlds. Something cold and wet touched my cheek. I looked up. It wasn't my office ceiling anymore. Rain pattered through bamboo slats, falling steadily onto my face. The walls of my office had dissolved, replaced by the rough-hewn interior of a punishment hut. My chair was gone. I sat in cold mud, the diary still clutched in my hands. But the diary was changing too. The leather cover grew soft, then translucent, then disappeared altogether. The pages turned to water in my hands, ink dissolving like blood in a stream until nothing remained but mud between my fingers. I was fully there now, not observing, not visiting, present. The rain soaked through my clothes, insects bit at my exposed skin, and the pervasive smell of rot and human misery filled my lungs. Panicking, I scrambled to my feet, searching for a way back, for any trace of my office, my life. There was nothing. Outside, a commotion drew my attention. Voices shouted in Japanese. Through the doorless entrance of the hut, I saw Arthur Finch, skeletal, broken but defiant, being dragged through the mud by 2 guards. Behind them followed a slight figure in an immaculate uniform, the camp commandant. I had only glimpsed him from a distance in previous visits, a shadowy authority figure. Now, as he passed the hut where I stood frozen, he turned his head and looked directly at me. His face was oddly serene, almost pleasant, but his eyes contained an ancient emptiness that made my soul shrivel. He saw me. He smiled. The commandant gestured with one gloved hand toward the guards, speaking words I couldn't understand. One of them broke off, turning toward my hut. From across the compound, through sheets of rain, the skeletal prisoner who had made eye contact with me before now watched impassively. There was resignation in his hollow eyes, but also something else. A terrible recognition, as if witnessing a changing of the guard. I understood then. I wasn't just reading Arthur's story anymore. I was about to become part of it. I couldn't move. My feet sank into the thick mud as the guard approached, his face blank beneath the heavy rain. Behind me, the skeletal prisoner watched with hollow eyes, not shocked but resigned, as if he'd seen this scene play out countless times before. The guard walked right through me. I felt nothing physical, but a cold emptiness spread through my chest as his ghostly form passed mine. He wasn't here for me, not yet. I was still just a witness. Arthur's screams echoed from beyond the huts. These weren't the loud, dramatic cries you'd hear in movies, but the dull, hopeless sounds of a man who knows no one is coming to help. The remaining prisoners turned away, their faces hard as stone. Only the skeletal man kept watching me. When night finally fell, I remained. The diary had vanished. My apartment was gone. Only the camp existed now with its mud, rain, and endless despair. Time shifted. I felt it, like a record skipping. Suddenly it was dawn. Arthur was back in the camp, his face bruised but alive. The prisoners moved through their daily routine. I watched as men I'd seen in darkness now worked in daylight, unaware of their own repetition. "You're new," a voice whispered beside me. The skeletal prisoner stood there, his eyes burning with fever. "You can see me?" I asked. "We all could eventually, but only I remember." He didn't look at me while speaking. Arthur wasn't the first, and I wasn't the first to watch. "I don't understand," I said, but deep down I did. The terrible truth was seeping into me like the rain. Someone always reads, someone always watches, then they become part of it. He finally turned to me. "I've been here 60 years, watching Arthur try to escape, watching him fail, watching him die." "Who were you?" I asked. "A historian like you, the museum's previous curator?" A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain. "The diary found you because I wanted it to," he continued. "I needed a replacement." As he spoke, his form began to fade, becoming transparent against the jungle backdrop. "Wait," I called out. "How do I escape?" His smile was terrible, relief mixed with pity. "You find another reader, another witness." He was barely visible now. "The diary is still there, in your world, waiting." Then he was gone, truly gone. The weight of 60 years of watching lifted from him and settling onto me. Night fell again. Arthur was dragged away again. Dawn came again. I understood my punishment now. My curiosity had made me a permanent witness to a tragedy I could never prevent. My empathy had trapped me here, forever watching, forever remembering. And somewhere in the real world, Arthur's diary sat in my abandoned office, waiting for the next curator to wonder about the voices of the forgotten, waiting for my replacement.